Joe Reinagel, Jason Minix, The Blitz.
Cowboys at Giants tomorrow on Thanksgiving. Cannot wait. It is The Blitz here on San Antonio Sports Star 94.1 FM, AM 1250. He is Joe Reinagel. I'm Jason Minix. Jane Slater from the NFL Network joining us now. Jane, I trust you recovered from your Friendsgiving that you had over the weekend. It seemed like the best Friendsgiving party I've ever seen, and everybody in their onesies.
Yes, we decided to wear zip-up, basically pajamas. Mine was a turkey costume, but allowed a lot of leeway after going up for my third serving of pumpkin pie.
Nice. That's a great idea, Friendsgiving.
Well, the question is,
that.
though, tomorrow for your reporting for the NFL Network, will you be wearing that turkey suit?
You know, I debated it, but if you watch our show, Michael Irvin, Mooch, and all of those guys provide plenty of banter on set. So I think I'll just stick to my reporting. We get 40 seconds, not a lot of time in between those hits.
All right, Jane, let's talk about the game because it is a big game. I mean, it's Giants-Cowboys first and foremost, and that makes it big on its face. But then both of these teams 7-3. Nobody's given the Giants a chance in this game. What do you say?
I think that has a lot to do with how much they're affected from an injury perspective. I mean, they literally are depleted at wide receiver, which is why the Giants are part of this OBJ sweepstakes. So they really, when you look at their offensive weapons, you've got Saquon Barkley and you've got Daniel Jones, who's, proven that he can be a pretty mobile quarterback. They're also not traveling 4 of their offensive linemen with injuries. One is Evan Neal. And then when you look at the fact they lost their corner, Adoree Jackson, I mean, it's a big deal. So if I had to guess, that's why they're not getting any favors. But, I kind of cautioned people this week, don't forget that the Packers felt like they didn't have any weapons either. They had a laundry list of injuries. That was a game Cowboys were expected to handily win, and they didn't. And I even had gone back to last year and remember the Denver Broncos lost. Then they went and they got a big win, and I think they held Atlanta to 3 points, and then they lost the next one. And so I would just say, and I think that they've learned from it. I mean, Dak Prescott was in the locker room talking this week about, the importance of handling success and how, they're calloused because of some of the things that they've been through. And, basically they all are making sure they hold each other accountable. But, Skylar Dixon from the AP asked a great question. He said, you guys were playing, to paraphrase, I don't know what I can say on the radio. I don't want to get dumped here. He said, you played, P word is the word we're looking for. How do you do that after a win? And he said, you just keep kicking tail. And then it was CeeDee Lamb who actually said that he was walking by with a plate of food with these ridiculous glasses on. And so it just kind of tells you the sort of energy in the locker room. But I think they can't rest on their laurels. This is a big division game. And then when you think about it, the Giants, 5 of their next 7 games are NFC East opponents. They really haven't gone through the East. So given their injury situation, given that they're moving through the NFC East so much in December, that's why this game is so big for the Cowboys, particularly if they want to get a sweep out of the Giants.
Jane Slater of the NFL Network joining us here on the Blitz. And you think about how the Cowboys, and I'll say it, they kicked the ass of the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, that was just so dominant. What I worry about is any kind of letdown. We've seen a near perfect football game from this Dallas Cowboys team. We know what they're capable of, but are they capable of doing it 4 days later?
Well, I would normally say yes, but I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's been going on at the start, some of this injury bug that's been moving through the defensive line. Now they've got Donovan Wilson on the list. It was Dante Fowler, Neville Gallimore. They even called up Tack McKinley to give him some options there. But a lot of these guys, DeMarcus Lawrence, he's dealing with a foot and whatever this stomach bug flu that's moving through the locker room. Mike McCarthy seemed to be optimistic that these guys would be able to play on Thursday, but they are listed as questionable. And so you're not getting that pressure up front. That's where we saw the lack of pressure against the Packers is where they got themselves in trouble, particularly in the running game. So that's just something we're sort of keeping our eye on right now. And as much as we've reached out to our sources, I mean, I'm not going to know how some of these guys are feeling really until tomorrow morning.
Jane, in your experience, and you've been covering the Cowboys for a while, and it's not just the Cowboys, but any team. having to turn around from a ball game on a Sunday to a Thursday causes all kinds of problems for these football teams, doesn't it?
Well, it's tough because by the time you get back from, Minnesota, it's, 11, 12 o'clock at night, basically when you get done with those games. So the 3:25 kick, by the time you get on the plane, it's 8, so by the time you're getting home, it's about 2. And then you're trying to cram in a couple of days of film. That's why they didn't really have a lot of practice this week. A lot of the guys were banged up from the physicality of that game against Minnesota, which is why Micah Parsons and Ezekiel Elliott didn't do much this week. Elliott himself said he actually likes it because he doesn't like to practice. And I don't know if you listen to Dallas Cowboys, it's their mic'd up segment, which is really great. The sounds from the sidelines. Micah was particularly agitated that at 8 minutes and 30 to go in the fourth, which all of us were trying to say in the fourth quarter, just bench all the starters.
Yeah.
He wanted to keep playing, and if he wasn't going to play, then he didn't want to practice next week.
It's funny. He was negotiating with his coach to get out there.
Right. And so I think a lot of these guys, they don't mind the fact that it's the practice. I think it's the film study that's tough, although it does help when it's what we call a common opponent. It's the uncommon opponents that Mike McCarthy says trip them up, like the Broncos or some of these AFC teams they don't typically see. But it does help that they are at least familiar with what they're getting from the Giants. And Dak had something interesting to say this week. He wasn't in New York for that last win over the Giants. That was Cooper Rush, but he talked about what he saw from the sidelines, and he wouldn't get into some of the specifics, and I wouldn't expect him to, but Wink Martindale has really been dialing up a lot of creative blitzes and a lot of exotic looks. But Dak said he was able to see a lot of stuff from the sidelines. And the one thing that he did say is just how it really, the competition starts up front, and how the offensive line of the Cowboys has really affected the way a lot of these other NFC East teams have drafted. I mean, when you look at Kayvon Thibodeau, for instance, the Giants making sure they had a guy like him. So I just thought that was an interesting take on all the things. Another little fun fact that I'll just throw out there, even though you didn't ask, Micah Parsons hasn't had a sack against the Giants yet, which I kind of found hard to believe. So you've got to think, given how motivated he is, he talked this week about punching bullies in the face, and they're not going to take your lunch money and being tired of it, that he's kind of circling that up there. And given the fact that they're not traveling for their offensive linemen, this might be the week to do it.
Jane Slater dropping knowledge here on the Blitz. Listen to her at the NFL Network. Watch her there on Twitter at Slater NFL. Great stuff. And you mentioned Zeke, and I'm curious, as well as Ezekiel Elliott, the emergence of Tony Pollard and the fact that the Cowboys seem to be using him more now. It's like they've discovered that, hey, you know what? He can handle more of a workload. The explosive plays that he always seems to deliver, and he out-touched Zeke the other day. Zeke's still the starter, but is it Tony Pollard is kind of the main guy? How is he handling the adjustment to less of a workload, even if he is still the starter and hasn't been replaced as the starter, if you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, look, the numbers show you that with less carries, Tony Pollard has more yards from scrimmage. And then when you're using him as a receiver threat, I mean, not dissimilar from what you see with Deebo Samuel. I mean, that was big on the 3rd and 14 in the game. I mean, that's what they've been saying that they want to show us. I think they didn't necessarily trust their offensive line. We started to see them using some more tight ends out there, and it's sort of confusing defenses a little bit. Like Kellen Moore has been able to get a little bit more creative, open up the playbook with some of the personnel that's available to him right now. But everyone I talked to in that building, I mean, you heard Zach Martin talk about it this week. I talked to a lot of the coaches. They feel like they're better with Zeke on the field. In other words, you've got a bruiser and you've got a shifty guy. So they're two change of pace backs, but they're both capable of catching the ball out of the backfield. They're both capable of rushing. But what you're getting from Ezekiel Elliott when you're out there that I didn't think that you were able to have, obviously, with the Green Bay Packers, you just keep using Zeke. And you load the box that opens up things for your wide receivers. But if you decide not to, I mean, he is wearing down those opposing defenses, and you start seeing that really in the 3rd and 4th quarter. And when we watched the Packers game, go back and look at them in the 4th and overtime, they felt fresh. And so I think that's why they consider this team better for Tony and Ezekiel Elliott to be on the field. But they are going to have some tough discussions. I mean, particularly if they get something done with Odell Beckham here. You've got Trayvon Diggs' contract have to really start thinking about Micah Parsons early. I mean, do you want to get into a bidding war with him? You can obviously tag him. He's only in the second year, but like he's just a guy that's going to be coming up at some point. You're going to have to figure out what are you going to do with Ezekiel Elliott. It's a Tony Pollard contract year. I've long said that I don't think Ezekiel Elliott's going to pull an Emmitt Smith and go to another team. I mean, Emmitt Smith will tell you, you've seen it in a football life. It was one of the worst decisions he ever made. And you saw it with DeMarcus Lawrence. Instead of trying to go to another team, he renegotiated his deal. I think they renegotiate his deal and make it more team friendly. And then I think they find the money for Tony Pollard. But I don't know if Tony Pollard is as married to the Cowboys as say Zeke is. Getting to know Zeke over the years, he likes the familiarity. He likes the locker room. He doesn't really do well without his small circle. Like he's kind of a shy guy, and not that great in social settings when he's not around his guys. That's just been my impression and talking to family members and him over the year and friends and even some of his teammates. So my feel on that is while he's got a really great agent in Rocky Arsenault, who, we saw how he was able to get, Todd Gurley money when they didn't think he deserved Todd Gurley money. I'll never forget that. I just think they find a way to get it done. I do just wonder what Tony Pollard is going to come in on the open market, although despite the fact that we've been seeing, and I was talking to one of the guys in the front office about this, how interesting it was the wide receiver market was so ridiculous this offseason. Look at the way these offenses this year have now recommitted to the run game. And so I just wonder if the running back market, which I thought was really hurt by Todd Gurley and Ezekiel Elliott's lack of production after their contracts, what that running back market's going to look like next year, particularly for a guy like Tony Pollard.
All right, Jane, I've got to ask you this because I just saw this tweet from Odell Beckham Jr. He tweeted at Giants, at Dallas Cowboys. It says, Battle Royale. Let's get it. What a legendary game this is. It seems to have coming down to the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants for Odell Beckham Jr. What are you hearing as far as the Cowboys side of things?
I have said this for the last couple of weeks, and I'm typically the type of person anytime, these names have come up, about Cowboys' real interest. Von Miller, I told you guys, and I'd reported this on NFL Network, they were all in on Von Miller, but the Bills paid him just an absurd amount of money. The Cowboys just didn't feel at his age, and given some of the guys that they had on their team, and I think looking back, they made a good move on that. I think a lot of people would agree with that, that Von Miller didn't make sense. This OBJ thing is about as real of a free agent chase as I've ever seen. And I truly believe that's because Jerry is looking at this team and seeing that the way that, think about the problems you've had in the past with the kicking game, the problems you've had in the past with your defense, the problems you've had in the past with your offense, with your quarterback. I think he's seeing all these things come together, but where I think he feels like he and maybe the front office messed up a little bit was letting Amari Cooper go. And so you've got all of that money sitting in a coffer. And, we keep talking about the piece of the pie, but what's beautiful about this OBJ thing is you're not giving away any draft picks. And for the Cowboys, that, we saw the Deshaun Watson deal. Like, if you want to figure out the money, you figure it out. But with this particular case, you figure out the money, but you're not giving up what they hold so dear to building their roster, and that is their draft picks. They typically re-sign a lot of their players because they draft so well, particularly in the mid-rounds, like the third through fifth picks. And so I think that's what makes it very exciting to them. I think he feels like a Jason Peters type player that can come in and really mentor some of these younger guys up. And, I talked to CeeDee Lamb a little bit about it this week. Look, you're vocally being supportive of this thing. Michael Gallup seems excited. Dak told us this week that it feels mutual, the interest there, his conversations via text, and a lot of the guys in the locker room have been reaching out with OBJ. Keep in mind, a lot of them played in the Pro Bowl a couple of years ago in Orlando together. So there's familiarity. Obviously, Dez and him are very close, and Dez is still close with a lot of the guys in the locker room. It feels real. But we'll just see what Jerry Jones is willing to pay, because the Giants are 1,000% desperate. When you look at their wide receiver room, they've got nothing. But if I'm OBJ, I'm looking at your injuries to your defense in New York. I'm looking at the fact you've got 5 of your next 7 games in the division. 5 of your next 7 games coming up are NFC East games. And then when you look at the Cowboys, it seems like their schedule's a little bit more favorable. And with a lot of their injuries behind them, Tyron Smith coming back, you're going to kick out Tyler Smith feels like this team is built for that championship run, which sounds like it's more important to Odell than even the money at this point. And don't forget, Odell's dad, his fandom for the Cowboys, his connections to Dallas. And I even caught up with OBJ at Pro Bowl a couple years, and I just asked him because he's one of my favorite players that I cover in the league. And I said, what do you think about Dallas? And he goes, man, I would love no state income tax. You have to really think about that when you go up to New York, seriously. And so I think those are a lot of things that a lot of these guys are thinking about right now.
It's interesting for the Cowboys, a luxury if they were to add him. They're good without him, over the top maybe with him, but it's going to be interesting. Jane Slater from the NFL Network, always appreciate the knowledge and insight. Have fun tomorrow at work on Thanksgiving.
Gotta get that Jerry Mac and cheese.